Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in the history of the American Northwest. 27 men went into the thick forests of northern Montana's Bitterroot Range in the winter of 1883. The logging and fur trade were very profitable, and they drew ambitious men to the wild with promises of wealth. Their camp, which was set up near what is now called Blackwater Creek, was meant to be a base for a season of hunting and trapping. Records show that they had the right tools, enough food, and knew how to survive on the frontier. Jeremiah Holcomb, the leader of the trip, had been in charge of similar trips for more than 15 years without any problems. But even with these good conditions, only 9 men would ever come out of those woods. The fact that 18 men went missing is one of the strangest mass disappearances in American frontier history. There were never any bodies found, and no clear explanation was ever given. The 9 people who lived through it didn't want to talk about what happened during those 3 months alone in the woods. What follows is a reconstruction of events based on bits and pieces of journals, local newspaper articles, territorial records, and the few testimonies that came out years later, when the survivors thought no one was listening. The Montana Territorial Register from the 17th of April 1883 said that the losses were due to bad weather in the winter and possible conflicts with native tribes. But weather records from that winter show that the weather was unusually mild, and the Salish people in the area had been on good terms with trappers for decades. In those woods, something else happened that the survivors tried hard to hide. This is the story of the Blackwater Creek hunting camp and the horrible secret that has been hidden for almost 100 years. In 1882, Mill Creek, Montana Territory was a small settlement with a general store, a sawmill that gave the town its name, 2 saloons, and a few wooden buildings that served as homes and businesses. It was a place where men came to look for their fortunes in lumber, furs, and sometimes gold. The valley was surrounded by mountains. The number of people living in the settlement changed with the seasons. It grew in the spring and summer when the passes were clear, and it shrank as winter approached. But some people saw a chance in the harsh Montana winters, when animals with fur grew their thickest coats and sold for the most money. One of these opportunists was Jeremiah Holcomb. He had lived in the territories for most of his life by the time he was 53. He was born in Pennsylvania and moved west when he was young. He worked as a surveyor before becoming known as the person who organized hunting and trapping trips. By 1882, people in Mill Creek and nearby towns knew who he was and what he was known for. He was known for being a strict planner, a strict disciplinarian, and a man who always brought his teams back alive. Holcomb placed an ad in the Mill Creek Gazette in November 1882, looking for experienced men to go on a winter expedition. The ad said, 3 months of work, equal shares of profits, and previous wilderness experience required. Inquire at Wilson's General Store. The Territorial Archives have store ledgers that show that 26 men were finally chosen from the applicants. They were between 22 and 48 years old. Most of them had worked with Holcomb before or were recommended by people he knew. Some of them were new to the area, but they brought useful skills or resources to the project. The trip was meant to be a business trip, mostly to trap animals with fur and look for good places for a spring cutting crew to log. On the 3rd of December 1882, the expedition left Mill Creek with 27 men in 8 wagons full of supplies that would last through the winter and into the spring. Jeremiah Holcomb, Augustus Reed, Samuel Perkins, Thomas Fletcher, William Norton, Benjamin Lewis, Charles Winston, Jacob Miller, Isaac Thompson, Frank Wilson, Daniel Roberts, Joseph Davis, Henry Adams, George Stewart, Edward Collins, Michael Williams, Robert Taylor, John Anderson, James Martin, David Brown, Richard Evans, Christopher Hughes, Paul Mitchell, Peter Schmidt, Frederick Cooper, Howard Griffin, and Eli Watson are all listed in the territorial records. Holcomb, Reed, Perkins, Fletcher, Norton, Lewis, Winston, Miller, and Thompson would all come back. The rest disappeared without a trace. It took them 11 days to get to their chosen hunting grounds. They followed well-known paths that took them across the Clark Fork River and then turned northwest into less-known areas. The land got harder and harder to navigate. Thick pine and fir forests, steep ridges and narrow valleys with fast-moving streams. Holcomb's journal says that after the fourth day they didn't see any other people. They did see old trapper cabins, and the odd prospect hole where a miner had tested the ground for gold. They got to their destination on December 14th, a flat area in a valley where 3 streams came together to make what Holcomb called Blackwater Creek. The water was dark because the tannins from the plants around it stained it. From a practical point of view, the site was well chosen. There was plenty of water, natural protection from the wind, lots of game trails visible in the light snow cover, and enough flat ground to set up a big camp. They got to work right away on building their winter homes. The men were split into groups. Some cut wood, some cleared the ground, and some started building the first cabins. Holcomb's journal from December 15th says, "Work is going well. Everyone is doing their part. The weather is good. The fir cabin should be finished by sundown. If the weather stays good, we should have all the men under proper shelter within a week." The camp was mostly done by December 21st. There were 7 cabins arranged in a rough circle around a bigger building that served as a mess hall and meeting place. A simple stockade made of sharpened logs surrounded the camp. It wasn't meant to keep people out, but to keep big predators away and stop the pack animals from wandering off, which was standard practice for wilderness camps at the time. Holcomb set up routines right away. Men were put on hunting parties, trapping lines, camp maintenance, and guard duty on a rotating basis. His journal from this time shows the methodical mind that made him famous for leading successful expeditions. It includes detailed lists of supplies, records of daily hunting yields, maps of established trap lines radiating outward from the camp, and careful notes on the weather. There were no major events during the first 5 weeks. The men got used to their routines. Every day, people checked the trap lines. Hunting parties brought in deer, elk, and even a moose now and then to add to their food supply. Pelts started to pile up: beaver, marten, fox, and the river otter, which was especially valuable because it lived in the streams. Holcomb's journal entries from this time are boring and mostly talk about hunting successes, the weather, and small fights between the men. He wrote on the 2nd of January, 1883, "Norton and Schmidt had a heated argument over a card game. I separated them before things got worse. Other than that, spirits are still high. The trapping lines are working well. I expect the first shipment of pelts to be ready by the end of the month." There was no sign of the horror that would soon take over the camp. During this time, the men were not completely alone. Holcomb's journal says that a system had been put in place to send the pelts that had been collected to the nearest trading post, which was a 5-day horseback ride away. There, they would be traded for more supplies, and any necessary communication with Mill Creek could take place. Wilson and Evans were chosen as couriers for the first such trip, which was planned for the end of January. They never went on that trip. The first strange thing in the record happened on the 21st of January, 1883. Holcomb's journal entry for this date contains a curious note. Reed reports unusual findings along the northern ridge, claims to have discovered abandoned camp, no sign of occupants, peculiar markings on trees surrounding site. Will investigate tomorrow if weather permits. The next day's entry is brief. Weather did not permit investigation. Reed agitated. Claims to have heard voices in the forest during night watch. Likely overtired. Have assigned him to camp duties for 3 days' rest. 3 days later, Holcomb records. Reed continues to speak of voices in the forest, now claims they call his name. Have examined him for fever or other ailments. Appears physically sound but mentally distressed. Other men beginning to avoid his company. January 26th brings the first indication that Reed's experiences might not be isolated delusions. Stewart and Brown report unusual sounds while checking northern trap line. Describe as whispering that follows but never comes close enough to understand. Both men of sound character and not given to fanciful notions. Have instructed all men to travel in groups of 3 rather than pairs until situation clarified. The following day's entry is ominous. Schmidt failed to return from trapline. Cooper and Mitchell sent to search. No sign by nightfall. Will continue search at first light. January 28th. Cooper and Mitchell located Schmidt's final trapline. Traps undisturbed. No sign of Schmidt. Unusual tracks in snow, possibly bear, though pattern inconsistent with any bear sign I've encountered. Men increasingly uneasy. January 29th. Cooper missing as of morning count. Mitchell claims they separated briefly while searching for Schmidt. When he called out, Cooper did not respond. Another search party formed. No success. Camp now down 3 men. Have ordered all trapping activities to be conducted in pairs. No man leaves camp alone. Holcomb's writing shows that he is getting more worried by February 1st. Men report sounds from the forest at night, describe them as voices without words, likely wind through rock formations, creating unusual acoustics. Nevertheless, have doubled night watch rotation. A pattern was forming. Men were disappearing 1 or 2 at a time, without a fight or alarm, often when they were briefly separated from their friends. The psychological effect on the other men was very strong. Holcomb's journal shows that the members of the expedition were getting more and more tense, fighting, not sleeping, and having what he calls nervous disorders. February 3rd. Mitchell was found about a mile from camp, confused and disoriented. He says he was led astray by familiar voices. A medical exam shows no physical injuries but extreme exhaustion. He talks about the door in the cave, but gets upset when asked more questions. We gave him whiskey and laudanum to calm him down. Things got worse very quickly after this. Holcomb's entries become less frequent and more upset. Mitchell found dead this morning, no apparent cause. Body cold, features frozen, an expression of extreme terror. Men insist on burial outside camp perimeter despite frozen ground. 4 hours to dig adequate grave. Roberts led prayer service. Morale at lowest point. That same day, Watson, Hughes, and Taylor failed to return from hunting expedition. Griffin and Anderson volunteered for search party. Reluctantly approved despite growing darkness, neither they nor the hunting party returned by midnight. Camp now down 8 men. Remaining men insist on gathering in Central Hall rather than dispersing to individual cabins, have agreed to this arrangement for sake of morale. There is a big gap in the journal between February 5 and February 18, when entries start again. Their character and content have changed completely. Holcomb's handwriting, which is usually very neat, looks shaky and rushed. He doesn't always write down the dates anymore. Sometimes he just writes day or night. One entry that doesn't have a date says, "They watch from between the trees. They are not what they appear to be. Another 7 more gone. They went for water. The creek is only 200 yards from camp. We heard no struggle, no cries for help. They simply vanish between one moment and the next." Those remaining refuse to speak of it, as if silence might protect us. The last entry, which is thought to be from late February, says, "We leave at first light the 9 of us who remain. We burn everything we cannot carry. We tell ourselves we will reach Mill Creek in 10 days if we maintain a steady pace. We tell ourselves we will be safe in daylight. We tell ourselves many things." What happened during those 2 weeks in February that are missing? The journal doesn't give any answers. Later, accounts from the survivors don't agree with each other and are often hard to understand. The only other document from this time that still exists is a piece of what looks like a personal diary that was found among Benjamin Lewis's things when the survivors went back to Mill Creek. There are only 3 entries in the fragment, and they are all undated. They say, "The singing comes from beyond the ridge now." Mitchell says it's coming from the cave, but there is no cave. Mitchell is not well. None of us are well. Reed says they're coming closer. Says they wear our missing friends' faces like masks. Says he can see what's behind the masks when they blink. He won't tell us what he sees. Holcomb ordered us not to speak of it. Says speaking gives it power, but silence hasn't protected us either. We are 19 now. Tomorrow there will be fewer. On the 12th of March 1883, the 9 survivors came out of the woods. The Mill Creek Gazette says that they came separately, not all at once. Reed and Miller were the first to come, stumbling into town just after dawn. Winston and Thompson got there at noon. The others came in before nightfall, but Holcomb was the last, coming in as it got dark. Their health was bad, but not life-threatening. They looked like they had been exposed to the cold, were malnourished, and were very tired, which is what you would expect from a long, hard winter trip. However, they didn't have any serious injuries, no frostbite or wounds that could have explained the loss of their friends, but their mental health was very bad. "The men seem very different from when they left 3 months ago," says the Mill Creek Gazette on the 14th of March, 1883. "They jump at sudden noises, avoid direct eye contact, speak little, and when asked for details of their trip, they give accounts that are so different that it seems like they are trying to hide something or are confused because of what happened. Their stories were so different that the authorities quickly became suspicious." Reed said they had been apart during a snowstorm. Miller said there had not been a blizzard, but an attack by a mountain tribe that was not known. Thompson and Winston wouldn't say anything at all. The other people gave different accounts of what happened, and none of them matched up with what we already knew or what the other people said. They all agreed that 18 men had died. There was still disagreement about how, why, and where. There was no clear explanation. The territorial governor sent Sheriff James Blackwood to talk to the survivors and see if there were any signs of foul play. Sheriff Blackwood was the great-grandfather of Theodore Blackwood, who would later look into the matter. Sheriff Blackwood's report, which is still in the territorial records, ends with the following. While inconsistencies in their accounts raise suspicions, there is no physical evidence of wrongdoing. The men appear traumatized rather than guilty. I recommend medical attention rather than legal action. Doctors who looked at the survivors noted strange symptoms. Dr. Martin Whitaker's medical report says, subjects show a strong dislike of darkness and insist on lamps staying on all night. They react with extreme fear to certain sounds, especially wind and trees or distant animal calls. Several report having the same nightmare of being called into the forest by familiar voices. Continued observation is recommended. On March 20th, the territorial governor sent a recovery group led by Lewis and Fletcher. They said in the official report they filed when they got back that they couldn't find the hunting camp. It looked like both guides were lost in an area they should have known well. The expedition came back empty-handed after searching for 10 days without success. This failure made people wonder. The Mill Creek Gazette asks on April 2nd, were our guides intentionally misleading the recovery team? If so, what horrors are they trying to hide? If not, what could have confused men who had successfully navigated the same terrain just weeks earlier? Finally, in June 1883, a second, bigger expedition found the camp's remains. They found the burned remains of cabins, which fits with what Holcomb wrote in his journal about burning everything before leaving. They didn't find any bodies, personal items, or signs of violence or struggle. The official report says, the site looks like it was quickly abandoned, but not in a chaotic way. There is no sign of an attack or natural disaster. The fate of the missing men is still unknown. However, Alexander Reynolds, the team's topographer, wrote about another discovery that was not mentioned in the official report. Reynolds writes, located unusual cave formation approximately 1 mile north of campsite. Entrance partially concealed by fallen timber. Interior walls covered with markings unlike any I have encountered. Not Indian pictographs, not minor symbols, not natural formations. Geometric patterns that seem to shift when viewed from different angles. Expedition leader ordered cave sealed with dynamite after 2 team members reported hearing voices calling from its depths. Detonation successful. Entrance completely collapsed. After giving their testimonies, the 9 survivors went their separate ways. Records show that most of them left Montana Territory completely. Augustus Reed moved to Oregon. Samuel Perkins moved to California. The others also spread out across the country and didn't talk to each other. Jeremiah Holcomb stayed in Mill Creek for a short time, according to the records we have. He left for Seattle in late 1883. He gave his journal, which he had brought out of the woods, to the Territorial Archives with the promise that it would not be opened for 75 years after his death. Finally, in 1960, it was opened. Holcomb is said to have killed himself in 1885. The mystery might have ended there, becoming a part of local folklore, if not for Theodore Blackwood. a graduate student at the University of Washington who found Holcomb's journal while working on his doctoral thesis about frontier settlements in 1962. Blackwood couldn't stop thinking about the Blackwater Creek event. His research notes, which are kept in university archives, show that he did a careful investigation that lasted almost a year. He found records from the county, old newspapers, church records, and letters from people who were still alive and their descendants. Most importantly, he talked to the still-living family members of the 9 men who came out of the woods in 1883. These interviews show patterns that are troubling. Martha Reed, Augustus Reed's granddaughter, said that her grandfather never slept in the dark and kept loaded rifles at every door and window until he died in 1884, just a year after he came back. William Perkins, Samuel Perkins's grandson, told stories about his grandfather's episodes, like when he would say that friends who had died a long time ago were watching him from the corner of the room with faces that didn't fit right. Blackwood's research also showed that 7 of the 9 survivors died within 2 years of their return, most of them by suicide or in other strange ways. In October 1884, Augustus Reed shot himself. In January 1885, Samuel Perkins drowned in the Sacramento River, even though people said he was a good swimmer. In March 1884, Thomas Fletcher was found hanging in his barn with what the coroner called a extraordinary terror look on his face. Jacob Miller and Isaac Thompson were the only ones who lived to be old. In their later years, they both became recluses. Miller passed away in 1927 at the age of 76 from natural causes. Thompson lived longer than all of them. He died in 1931 at the age of 82. Edward Thompson, Thompson's son, found a sealed envelope in his father's personal papers after he died. The envelope had the words, "To be burned unread upon my death," written on it. Edward Thompson kept the envelope but did not read what was inside, as his father had asked. He gave it to Blackwood without opening it, but Blackwood convinced him that the historical value of what was inside was worth breaking this promise. There was a long story inside about what Thompson said happened at Blackwater Creek. The document, dated January 3rd, 1930, begins, "I am the last living witness to what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883. As death approaches, I find the need to record the truth, though I have spent my life concealing it. Let this account serve as both confession and warning." According to Thompson, the trouble began not with the disappearance of Schmidt, as Holcomb's journal suggests, but several days earlier. Thompson says, "It was Reed who found the cave, not an abandoned camp as Holcomb wrote. The entrance to the cave was half hidden by fallen timber. Inside, Reed saw strange markings carved into the stone walls. Not Indian signs, not miners' markings, something older, something none of us recognized. Reed took people to see what he had found." Thompson goes on to say, 7 of us went into the cave with Reed. Holcomb didn't want to go because he had trapping lines to check. Inside, we found markings that went deep into the mountain. Fletcher, who had some schooling, said they looked like no language he knew, but were very precise mathematically. Roberts noticed that they seemed to change when we looked at them from different angles, as if they were moving under our gaze. Thompson tells how they found a chamber deep inside the cave system. The walls opened up into a space bigger than our mess hall. In the middle of it stood what Roberts called a door frame with no door. It was a perfect rectangle of stone that stood on its own on the cave floor. The only thing we could see beyond it was the far wall of the chamber. But something about that frame made us uneasy. The air around it seemed to waver, like heat rising from summer rocks. Thompson says that what happened next doesn't make any sense. Schmidt was closest to the frame. He reached for it but didn't touch it. He just pointed. He said he felt a cold draft coming through. Then he stepped forward, as if to go around the frame. But instead he went through it. One moment he was there. The next he was gone. No sound. No flash of light. He was just gone, as if he'd never been. People panicked. The men ran away from the cave and back to camp. They told Holcomb and the others what they had seen. Most people thought it was a joke or hysteria. But Cooper and Mitchell insisted on going back to look into it. Sure that Schmidt was just playing a big joke, they never came back. From here on out, Thompson's story gets more and more disturbing. He talks about how men kept disappearing over the next few weeks, not just from the cave, which they had sealed shut with fallen trees, but also from the camp itself. They were taken when they were alone. A man would go behind a cabin to be alone or walk to the edge of the clearing to use the bathroom and never come back. There were no tracks leading away and no signs of a fight. The voices were even scarier. We began to hear them after the first week. Familiar voices calling from the forest. Schmidt's voice, Cooper's voice, each man who had vanished, calling to those who remained, asking for help, begging to be let back into camp. We maintained strict discipline. No one responded. No one ventured out after dark. But each night the voices drew closer. Each night they sounded less human. Most disturbing of all was Thompson's description of what they began to see at the forest's edge. They looked like our missing friends standing just outside the firelight. But something was off. Their proportions were slightly off. Their movements were either too fluid or too stiff. Their faces were blank, even when they were calling out for help. And their eyes, when the firelight hit them, they didn't reflect red like an animal's would. Instead, they were a deep, impenetrable black. Thompson says that by February, the survivors had formed groups. Winston led one group that wanted to leave the camp right away. Another group led by Robert said they had to find and bring back their missing friends. Holcomb said they should wait for better weather before trying to get back to civilization. Roberts and his group went into the woods one morning with guns and a plan to find the missing men. That was the last straw. They left camp when they were 15. Thompson writes, "By nightfall, none had returned. We heard their screams throughout the afternoon, distant at first, then closer, then abruptly silenced. When darkness fell, 17 figures stood at the forest's edge, our missing companions, Roberts among them, all standing motionless, watching the camp. They all had the same blank look on their faces. The 9 who lived made their escape the next morning. They left quickly, taking only a few supplies and leaving behind most of their gear." Thompson's story gets broken up here, and he talks about a desperate 10-day journey through the woods. "We did not travel as a group," he writes. "That was our salvation. We scattered, each man making his own way, using the sun and stars to keep a southeastern course toward Mill Creek. By day, the forest was just a forest." Thompson never says what was following them at night. He only says, "They are not gone. They are never gone. They found a way through, and now they walk among us. They look like men, but they are not men, and they are spreading." The document ends with a mysterious warning. If you see a man at noon who doesn't cast a shadow, who doesn't blink in strong wind, who says your name like he's learning how the word tastes, run. Don't look back. Don't answer when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all. Theodore Blackwood became convinced that Thompson's story had some truth in it, even though it might have been changed by trauma and time. His research notes show that he is becoming more and more concerned with checking specific facts. He looked at geological surveys to make sure there were cave systems in the area. He talked to older people who lived in the area about local stories that happened before the Blackwater Creek incident. He made a list of people who have gone missing in the Bitterroot Range since the first European explorers came to the area. Most importantly, Blackwood tried to find the descendants of the 18 men who went missing. He couldn't find any no-death certificates, no estate records, and no mentions in family Bibles or church records. It was like they had never been there, except for their names on Holcomb's expedition list. Professor Lawrence Merritt, Blackwood's faculty advisor, was worried about how erratic his student was becoming. Merritt writes in a letter to the department chair on the 12th of May, 1963, "Blackwood has given up all pretense of academic objectivity." He talks about the Blackwater incident as if it were happening right now, not 80 years ago. He hears strange noises outside his apartment at night. He carries a sidearm saying it has silver bullets in it, but I think this is just a strange joke. I suggest he take a leave of absence. Blackwood left Seattle for Montana before anything could be done. On the 7th of June, 1963, he sent a postcard to Merritt saying, "Leaving tomorrow for the Bitterroot Range. Have coordinates for the camp location. Will verify Thompson's account directly. If I do not return by July 1st, notify Sheriff's Department in Missoula. University records show that Blackwood left Seattle on the 8th of June 1963. He never came back. 3 weeks later, a search party found his deserted campsite. His research materials, such as Thompson's account, were found unharmed. No one ever found Blackwood himself. The University of Washington's Department of History officially closed Blackwood's case in September 1963, saying that he was missing and probably dead because of an accident in the woods. His research was put away and mostly forgotten about until 1968, when Professor Marion Leach found it while going through departmental records. Leach was interested in Blackwood's results, so she did her own research. She never went out into the field. Instead, she looked at old records and talked to people who lived in the Bitterroot area. Her research found a disturbing pattern. The area around Blackwater Creek had seen many people go missing since the first European explorers came to the area. French trappers called it La Forêt qui prend in the 1,820 seconds, which means the forest that takes. According to Native American stories, there was a thin place where the line between worlds could be crossed if certain conditions were met. Leach's most important finding was that the 9 people who survived the 1,883 incident were not the only ones who came out of the woods that season. From March to October 1,883, 11 strange men showed up in settlements all over Montana Territory. These men had no history in the area, couldn't or wouldn't explain where they came from, and according to local records, they acted and spoke in strange ways. Leach made a list of these people using records from the territory, newspapers, and church registries. One of them was John Smith, who probably used a fake name. He showed up in Helena in April 1883 and was described in police reports as speaking in a monotone voice and standing still for hours. They were arrested for vagrancy but got away from jail. There is no record of what happened next. Thomas Green, who came to Butte in May 1883, opened a barber shop. Customers said he hardly ever blinked and only breathed when he spoke. The store was found empty in October 1883, and there is no record of what happened next. William Jones became a school teacher in a small settlement near what is now Missoula in September 1883. School records say that he was very quiet and liked to watch kids without saying anything. Parents said their kids were having nightmares, and then they disappeared. There is no record of what happened next. The pattern was always the same. Men would show up out of nowhere, act strangely, join communities for a short time, and then disappear without a word. In the years that followed, Leach found similar cases in nearby states and territories, which suggests that the original location was slowly losing people. The culmination of Leach's research is a monograph entitled Echoes from Blackwater, Displacement and Identity in Frontier Catastrophe. The university said they wouldn't publish her work because they were worried about the way she did it. In 1969, Leach stepped down from her job. No one knows where she is now. The last document in the University of Washington's archive about the Blackwater Creek incident is a letter from Edward Thompson, the son of survivor Isaac Thompson, to Professor Leach. It is dated July 1969. It reads in part, "Your inquiry regarding my father's account has caused me considerable distress. I had hoped the document would remain unread, as he wished. Now that its contents are known, I feel compelled to share one additional detail. In his final years, my father became convinced he was being watched. He installed locks on every door and window of his home. He refused to go out after sunset. The night before his death, he called me to his bedside and said, 'They've found me at last. The ones who took Schmidt and the others. They wear their faces still, though it's been 50 years. I dismissed this as the rambling of a dying man. Now, having read your summary of his written account, I am less certain. Last week, I saw a man standing across the street from my home. He remained motionless for hours, watching my house. When approached by a neighbor, he identified himself as Peter Schmidt, the name of one of the men who vanished in 1883. The neighbor thought nothing of it, but I remembered my father's stories. I am leaving town tomorrow. I advise you to abandon this line of research. People have mostly forgotten about the Blackwater Creek incident. In the early 1900s, the area became part of national forest land. Blackwater Creek is no longer named on modern maps. Thompson's hunting camp and cave are still not known exactly where they are. But every now and then, reports come out of the area that sound like parts of the original event. A team of 5 men who were surveying lumber resources went missing in 1922. 3 hikers went missing from a marked trail in 1947. Their gear was found neatly arranged next to the path. A family of 4 went missing while camping in 1958. Their car was found with a flat tire at a Forest Service road turnout. Records from the Forest Service. From the 1,940 seconds to the 1,960 seconds show strange animal behavior in the area, such as birds stopping singing in the middle of a song, game animals leaving their usual territories, and predators avoiding certain areas for no apparent reason. Rangers who worked in the district often asked to be moved. A lot of people said they heard voices in the woods, especially at night. These reports were systematically disregarded as manifestations of isolation and challenging working conditions. A geological survey was done in the area in 1965 as part of a larger resource assessment. The survey team's report has an interesting footnote. Anomalous acoustic properties observed in Sector G7. Sound appears to reflect in unpredictable patterns, creating impression of voices where none exist. Recommend further study by qualified acoustic specialists. No such study was ever done. A 1967 memo from the U.S. The Forest Service's regional office says that there was unauthorized digging in the same area. Evidence of recent digging discovered by Ranger Patrol appears to be an attempt to access a cave system. No permits issued for archaeological or geological exploration in this sector. Recommend increased patrols. The patrol reports that followed show that no suspects were found. What really happened to the 18 men who disappeared from the Blackwater Creek hunting camp in 1883? The official story, bad weather and possible conflict with native tribes, doesn't hold up to even the most basic scrutiny. The survivors' conflicting stories point to a deliberate effort to hide the truth. Thompson's story, which may be affected by trauma or mental illness, fits with local legends and events that happened later in ways that are hard to ignore. Thompson's last writing suggests that whatever the men found in the woods didn't stay there, which is perhaps the most disturbing thing. His assertion that they are spreading implies a threat not confined to a distant wilderness area, but one that could arise anywhere. He wrote, "They look like men, but they aren't men. A warning, a false belief, or proof of an ongoing invasion?" One last document is worth looking at. A staff member at the Montana Historical Society found a letter that had not been cataloged before while doing routine maintenance on the archives in 1967. The letter was apparently written by Jeremiah Holcomb shortly before his death in 1885. The letter was addressed to the territorial governor, but never delivered. It has only one paragraph. "I write not to confess, but to warn. We brought something back with us, not in our hands or in our packs, but in our minds. A door once opened cannot be fully closed. They watch me now as I write these words. They wear familiar faces, Schmidt, Cooper, Roberts, and the others. They stand at the corners of my vision, patient and expectant. They know I will join them soon, but before I do, know this: they are not confined to the forest any longer. They walk the streets of your towns. They sit in your churches and your council meetings. They may wear the faces of those you once knew. Trust nothing, trust no one. The door stands open, and they continue to come through." The letter was put away because people thought it was the ramblings of a man going crazy, but Thompson's story and the patterns that Blackwood and Leach found make it seem more dangerous. Something strange happened in Seattle in 1968. Police records show that a man named Theodore Blackwood was arrested for causing trouble. The arresting officer's report says, subject was bothering pedestrians and saying he had just come back from Montana after 5 years in the forest. Subject looked confused and underfed, and his clothes were torn but clean as if he had just put them on. When asked who he was, subject became angry and said, "I am not Blackwood." Blackwood is gone. Subject was sent to Western State Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. The man's hospital records show that he was let go after 3 days because he was not a danger to himself or others. The doctor's notes say, "The patient speaks in strange ways, often stopping mid-sentence as if listening to unheard voices. He stares without blinking for long periods of time, which is uncomfortable." He says he is Theodore Blackwood, but doesn't know anything about Blackwood's academic work or personal life. After being released, the man disappeared. There is no record at the university that anyone claiming to be Theodore Blackwood ever got in touch with them. A journalist talked to his family in 1970, and they said they hadn't heard from him since he went missing in 1963. In the years after the 1968 incident, Seattle newspapers sometimes reported seeing a man who looked like Blackwood. In 1971, the Seattle Times published a short article called "Missing Professor Spotted Downtown." It was about a thin man in old-fashioned clothes who said he was Theodore Blackwood and was seen standing still for hours outside. The University of Washington Library. When campus security looked into it, they didn't find anyone who fit this description. The forest is still there. Even though it has a new name, Blackwater Creek still flows. There has never been an official discovery of the cave, if it exists. In December 1882, 27 men went into the wilderness, but only 9 came out. What happened to the other 18 people and what could have happened in their place is still one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries of the American frontier. In 1972, Park Ranger David Corbin wrote an unusual incident report while patrolling what is now the Lolo National Forest, which is where the Blackwater Creek camp is thought to be. The report talks about meeting an old man in old-fashioned clothes at a trailhead that wasn't very busy. Corbin says that the man said he was Peter Schmidt and was waiting for my companions to return from their trap lines. When Corbin told him that trapping was not allowed in the National Forest, the man smiled and said, "The forest has its own rules." When Corbin turned to the radio for help, the man disappeared. A later search found no tracks leading away from the area. Corbin's report ends with a personal note. The subject's behavior was very disturbing. He kept eye contact without blinking, spoke in a monotone voice, and his skin looked waxy or fake under the flashlight. I asked for permission to avoid solo patrols in this area. Permission was given. The next year, Corbin moved to Yellowstone National Park. There were reports like this in the area from time to time. In 1985, a group of hunters said they saw men standing still among the trees at dusk. The hunters said they looked like old-time trappers and were watching us without saying anything. When people got close, the figures are said to have run into the woods, moving in a way that was strange and fast. The hunters cut their trip short, saying the encounter had spooked their horses. In 1994, a group of college students on a weekend hike said they heard voices calling from off-trail near sunset. One student left the group to look into it and never came back. 2 days later, search and rescue teams found the missing student. He was confused and had been outside for too long, and he didn't remember where he had been. The report says that during his rescue, he kept saying the same thing. They wear familiar faces, but they are not who they seem to be. The discovery made during the building of a new fire access road in 2002 was probably the most disturbing. Workers found what looked like the foundation of an old cabin about 10 miles from the nearest known historical settlement. An archaeological study found that the building was built in the late 1800s. One of the artifacts found was a metal button with the initials PS on it. This could link it to Peter Schmidt, one of the missing trappers. The archaeological report says that the cabin looked like it had been set on fire on purpose, and there is proof that the fire started from inside. The Bitterroot Range has been completely mapped, its forests cut down and regrown, and its animals studied a lot since Blackwood went missing. Even now, local guides tell visitors not to camp near some unmarked streams. Forest Service workers leave the district at a higher rate than workers in similar jobs. And sometimes, hikers say they have strange experiences, like hearing familiar voices calling from thick underbrush or seeing figures between trees that move in ways that seem almost, but not quite, human. Rachel Carter, a documentary filmmaker, started looking into the Blackwater Creek incident in 2013 as part of her research for a possible series on historical mysteries that have never been solved. Her production notes, which she shared with her coworkers, show that she was very organized. She talked to local historians, looked through old documents, and scouted locations in the Lolo National Forest. On the 18th of September 2013, she sent her producer an email that said, "I think I've found the real site of the Blackwater camp. It fits Holcomb's descriptions perfectly. I'm going to do a final scout tomorrow with a local guide. If it checks out, we'll start filming next week." Carter never came back from that trip. They found her rental car parked at a trailhead, locked and not touched. She couldn't find her camera gear. The guide she had planned to meet said she never showed up for their meeting. Search efforts went on for 2 weeks before they were called off because of early snow. When they started up again in the spring of 2014, they couldn't find any sign of Carter. 3 months after Carter went missing, a strange video was put up on her professional YouTube channel. The shaky and partially hidden video shows a heavily wooded area at dusk. Day 3 of the solo search. "I think I found it." These foundations match the description in Holcomb's journal. The camera moves over what looks like stone foundations that have been overgrown with plants. The voiceover goes on. "There's something else here, some kind of structure that's not on any of the maps." The video shows a rocky outcropping that might have an opening. The camera gets closer, and you can see that there is darkness beyond. The narrator's voice gets excited. "This has to be the cave Thompson talked about. The entrance was supposed to have fallen in 1883, but here it is." I'm going to go inside for a quick look. The video gets darker, and the camera's built-in light is the only thing that lights it up. There are stone walls with faint markings that match Thompson's description. The narrator's voice is now quiet. "These markings seem to change when I look at them from different angles, just like in the story." The camera moves deeper into the cave. The video suddenly becomes unstable, as if the person holding the camera had tripped. You can see a short glimpse of what looks like a rectangular stone structure that stands alone in the cave's interior. The narrator gasps. The camera falls, and all you can see is the rock floor. For about 30 seconds, there are sounds of footsteps, fast breathing, a sound that could be voices in the distance, and then silence. There is a black screen for the last 10 minutes of the video. Audio analysis shows that there were quiet sounds during this time, like footsteps and distant voices that audio experts say are not clearly identifiable as human speech. In the last few seconds, there is a whispered phrase that people have interpreted in different ways. "They're wearing our faces now" is the most common interpretation. YouTube took the video down within 24 hours because it violated their rules against disturbing content. There are copies of it in different online archives. Law enforcement looked into the upload but couldn't find out who had gotten into Carter's account. Her case is still open. The 9 people who lived through Blackwater Creek took something out of the woods with them. It could have been physical evidence or a secret they kept until they died. We may never know for sure what that secret was. It could have been the trauma of seeing their friends die in the wild. Or it could have been something much worse. We do know that 27 men went into the forest, and only 9 came out. In the years that followed, strange figures appeared in settlements all over the region. These figures looked like men, but people who saw them said they were somehow wrong in ways that were hard to explain. A hiker found a pile of stones that looked like a cairn in a remote part of the Lolo National Forest in 2018. There was a metal box under the middle stone that was badly rusted but still closed. There was a handwritten note on paper that was falling apart inside. Because of water damage, most of the text was unreadable, but some phrases were still clear. "Found the cave again despite the collapse. They continue to come through. Wear our faces but cannot perfectly mimic. Must. Recognize them by their stillness, their fixed gaze. I do not trust even familiar faces in the forest." The note was signed TB, which could be Theodore Blackwood, but handwriting analysis was inconclusive because of the paper's condition. The site was about 15 miles from where Blackwood's campsite had been found in 1963. The Forest Service worker who first looked at the note asked to be moved the next week. During his exit interview, he only said that he didn't feel safe working alone in that district anymore. When asked for more details, he wouldn't say anything more, saying, "Some things are better left unsaid." Paranormal researchers and conspiracy theorists have been more interested in the Blackwater Creek incident in recent years. There are hundreds of posts on internet forums that guess what happened to the 18 men who went missing. There are a lot of different theories, from the boring bear attacks, tribal wars, and fighting within the tribe, to the crazy alien abduction, portals between dimensions, and possession. The claims of modern encounters are the most disturbing. More than 30 posts have been made on different forums since 2010 about experiences in the Lolo National Forest that are similar to what people have said about Blackwater Creek. Voices calling from deep in the forest, figures that move in strange ways, and men in old-fashioned clothes who stand still among the trees. Even though many of these claims can be written off as hoaxes or misunderstandings, the fact that they are consistent with historical accounts raises some troubling possibilities. In 2021, a small group of researchers from the anthropology department at the University of Montana did a small archaeological survey in the area where the Blackwater Creek campsite is thought to be. The preliminary report says, evidence of 19th century human habitation consistent with temporary encampment, multiple cabin foundations identified, evidence of deliberate burning. No human remains located. Survey terminated prematurely due to team members reporting auditory hallucinations and psychological distress. The team leader, Dr. Rebecca Stern, went into more detail in a later interview. Something about that location affected my team psychologically. 3 experienced field researchers all reporting the same symptoms: voices calling their names, peripheral visual disturbances, and profound and irrational dread. I've worked archaeological sites across North America for 20 years and never experienced anything like it. We collected our samples and left. None of us would consider returning. The samples collected included soil from the cabin foundations, fragments of burned wood, rusted metal objects, and stone from a nearby cave entrance. A first look at the cave stone showed strange features, like microscopic patterns that seemed to change depending on the angle of view. This fits with both Thompson's story and Blackwood's notes. Further research was halted when 2 laboratory technicians experienced headaches and auditory hallucinations following extended exposure to the samples. After that, all the materials were sealed and put in a safe storage area at the university. Dr. Stern's request for a more thorough investigation was turned down. The official reason given was a lack of money. Unofficially, co-workers said that federal agencies had told university administrators some troubling things about the site. They might still be among us. The forest knows things that no one else does. The door stays open, and somewhere in the thick woods of the Bitterroot Range, the sound of what happened at Blackwater Creek in the winter of 1883 still echoes. A warning that wasn't heeded, a mystery that wasn't solved, and a horror that hasn't faded over time. A hiker told Forest Service workers about a strange encounter in 2022. He was resting at a remote stream crossing when he saw a man in old-fashioned clothes standing still on the other bank. When the hiker asked who he was, the man said he was Jeremiah Holcomb and that he was waiting for my men to return from their trapping lines. The hiker didn't think anything of it at the time, but when he told a ranger about it later, the ranger recognized the name right away. A later search of the area turned up no tracks or signs that anyone else had been there. The ranger's report ends with possible case of mistaken identity or fabrication. Alternatively, witness encountered individual with knowledge of local history engaging in historical reenactment. No further action warranted. The report was filed and forgotten. But the questions still stand. What if the 18 men who went missing in 1883 never really left the woods? What if whatever took their place is still around, wearing borrowed faces and imitating human behavior just well enough to fool casual observers? What if Thompson's warning, "They look like men, but they are not men," wasn't a lie, but a desperate truth? The Blackwater Creek incident does not provide clear answers, only unsettling possibilities. Without definitive proof, we must each determine the degree of credibility to ascribe to the testimonies of traumatized survivors, fervent researchers, and contemporary witnesses. The explanation may be commonplace. The psychological ramifications of isolation, the inaccuracy of historical documentation, and the human propensity to identify patterns and construct narratives from coincidence. Or maybe something happened in those woods that can't be explained, something that still has effects on people who are far away from where it happened. Maybe the door Thompson talked about is still open, a way between worlds that was never really closed. Listen closely. Their voices might be calling your name in the space between heartbeats. And if you hear them and feel drawn to the dark shadows between old trees, remember Thompson's last warning. If you see a man who doesn't cast a shadow at noon, who doesn't blink in strong wind, and who speaks your name as if he were learning how the word tastes, run. Don't look back. Don't answer when he calls after you. What wears his skin is not a man at all. For the 27 men who went into the Montana wilderness in 1883, what started out as a normal trip turned into a mystery and horror. Only 9 came back, and they were forever changed by what they had been through. The other 18 disappeared into history, or maybe into something even stranger. Their true fate is still unknown, and their story is a disturbing footnote in the history of the American frontier. The woods are still there. Blackwater Creek is still flowing, even though it has a new name. And in the thick woods of the Bitterroot Range, something is watching and waiting. Something that has faces that look like people. Something that calls out to you in a familiar voice. Something that came into our world through a door that should have stayed shut. In 1883, 27 men went into the woods. Only 9 of them walked out. The others might be closer than you think.